the picture always kind of plays out. It's always sometimes one of the children lives at home with the parent, and that parent is always giving them money for everything. And that's often, a red flag. That child's using undue influence over their parent to possibly commit elder financial abuse.
What laws are out there to protect? I know there are laws out there, but what laws are out there to protect the elderly?
I would notify Adult Protective Services is what I would do. And as a licensed professional fiduciary, if I suspect elder abuse, either mental or financial, I have a mandatory reporting that I'm supposed to notify Adult Protective Services.
Hello, today we have a wonderful guest, Marina Ware from Diablo Valley Fiduciary. I've known Marina for a couple of years now, and she's just a great influence and support in our local community. So Marina, I would love for you just to tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got into being a fiduciary.
Okay, so I'm a licensed professional fiduciary. That allows me to serve as power of attorney for finance and healthcare, successor trustee, court conservator, guardian, and conservatorship in probate court. My career started as a paralegal working in the area of estate planning and probate, and I worked in that field for about 14 years, and that gave me the foundation to have the skills to become a licensed professional fiduciary.
That's awesome. Now, I know in senior living, we need fiduciaries often. We rely on your support. But is there anything that you can tell our audience that would help them to understand? I know you just kind of gave us a spiel about what fiduciaries do, but what are we missing? What do fiduciaries do to help support seniors, whether that's someone that's in a senior living community or at home?
So basically, oftentimes we have an orphan senior, or we have a senior who has distant family members across the U.S. They don't have anyone local to help them. It could be that they're starting to lose cognition and they're needing assistance with their health care. Maybe they're needing assistance with bill paying. And so that's where a licensed professional fiduciary can step in and help them make those important decisions.
There's a lot of kind of buzz out there about fiduciary services, right? There's families that may or may not know about what a fiduciary does. And then there's a lot of professionals like myself who work with seniors who knows more or are more familiar with what fiduciaries do. And we love having partners like yourself because we know that you are a legal trusted resource for our seniors. But adult children who may not really know what fiduciaries do, who may not really be keen to fiduciaries because they want to be in control, there may be a little bit of a challenge, I would say. And I'd love if you can speak into that. There's, again, adult children, maybe they don't understand what you do, or there's a conflict because they're trying to control their parents' wishes, if you will. So what are some of the things that you can tell us about with adult children being in the mix? What are some of the misconceptions or what should they know about what a fiduciary does that would help them to say, okay, my parent absolutely, or my loved one absolutely needs a fiduciary, and this is why?
A lot of it has to deal with the family dynamics. Many years ago, there was a tradition. You always named your eldest son to be the executor or trustee in your estate plan. And what it comes down to is that maybe that individual simply does not have the intellectual or financial training to really step into that role. And so that's where fiduciaries can come in and help with those types of problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we have relied on fiduciaries for many things, right? Not only to carry out the wishes of a person, But also sometimes there's been multiple children involved and they're not all on the same page, or it's really challenging
Right.
for a parent or a senior to have their wishes carried out because one child feels like they could take ownership over really deciding what their parent wants after their passing. And, or maybe they again, they don't get along. The siblings don't get along and the parent wants to avoid any conflict after their passing. And so this is something that we really rely on fiduciary services. And I feel like families, when they're looking out for the best interest of their loved one, they definitely want to lean on a fiduciary for support. Is there anything that you wanted to touch on that, Marina?
No, I think that, um, you know, anyone who is setting up their estate plan can recognize those conflicts ahead of time. They know that their children don't get along. They know that there's always been this sibling rivalry. So you can kind of see that early on. And those are the types of cases where people call me for assistance is when you have the family dynamics, you have siblings who don't get along, or they have differences in opinion over their mom's health care or even her finance.
Yep. You know, I'm actually a really good example of this. My father lives in Hawaii. I live in California. I have three sisters that live in the state of Hawaii, and we don't all see eye to eye. And so I've really encouraged my own father to get a fiduciary because my eldest sister, the eldest of all four girls, wants to have control. She believes she should have control because she believes that she's being the eldest should have that authority and right. And the other three younger siblings definitely do not agree with that. And a matter of fact, I personally have really tried to support my dad with his mental health as he is alive and say, Dad, I know you don't want to worry about what's going to happen after you pass. You don't want to worry now about what that looks like. You don't want us to fight and argue over these things, right? They're just belongings, they're things. So fiduciary is probably the best way to go. And can you speak into this a little bit? My father is in a different state than I am. He needs to find a fiduciary that's local to him. Is that right?
If he's looking for a healthcare power of attorney, I would probably recommend that he find somebody local. If he's looking for a successor trustee, typically that can be done from anywhere. And
Okay.
as a national certified guardian licensed in 46 states, my license allows me to serve as successor trustee in the state of Hawaii.
Okay, that's good to know. So, what I just heard you say is that you should be licensed as a fiduciary in the state that where you want to support a client. And this is for, say it again. I'm totally going to botch the name of the license.
It's called National Certified Guardian. So my license allows me to serve as trustee and executor and power of attorney in 46 other states. The four states where they each have their own individual licensing are Arizona, Florida, Texas, and Washington. But the
Wow.
46 states, I can administer estates there for sure.
That's wonderful. So that's great to know for other professionals who are serving seniors, looking for someone for their client or even adult children, looking for someone to support your loved one or your parent, that you don't necessarily have to go in state. You can go out of state. And Marina, you touched on something too that I want to dive into a little bit more. You said there's a difference when it comes to like their finances, their assets versus their their care, right? So what is that? Can you go into that a little bit deeper?
Okay, so a financial power of attorney allows the fiduciary to supervise and manage an individual's finances. That means they could do bill paying, they can coordinate with their stockbroker. Um, Basically, they're supervising their financial assets for them. Now, with a healthcare power of attorney, that pertains to medical decisions, and that also involves making decisions regarding their healthcare.
Okay,
You have
perfect.
financial power of attorney for finance. That's all the financial things. And then you have a healthcare power of attorney, and that deals with an individual's healthcare decisions.
We've been talking a lot about those who have children and maybe familial conflict and trying to avoid that. But isn't it right that those who don't have children, having a fiduciary is just as important? And can you tell me why that might be?
Oftentimes because if you have an orphan senior, somebody who doesn't have any children, maybe they're a widow, they don't know who to name. Maybe in the back of their mind thinking, oh, well, I'll name my neighbor, or maybe I'll name my best friend from college. But what it comes down to is that maybe those individuals don't have the legal or financial expertise to carry out that individual's bequests and their final wishes. So the big question comes down to, does the person have the intellectual capability to handle that task? And it's a big job. There are a lot of things involved: paying all the bills, liquidating all of the assets, handling all of the taxes, and then making the distribution to the heirs and beneficiaries. It's quite a tough job.
Yeah, I think most people just look at fiduciary and they assume, okay, this is just the distribution part of things, but that's not the case. There's a lot more that goes into it, clearly.
That's correct.
Yeah. You had covered something and I think we should touch a little bit more on that. But there is a difference between a fiduciary, a trustee, a power of attorney. I just remembered what I was going to say. I'll finish this and go back to that. So there's a difference between a fiduciary, a trustee, a power of attorney. And what is that difference? And when is it important to have each of these in place?
Okay, so a fiduciary could be a person or an entity when that entity or person is responsible for the legal or financial interest of a person. So that, again, that could be a bank, that could be your attorney, could be your realtor. Those individuals have a fiduciary interest, and that means they have to act in the best interest of the person. So that's kind of the term fiduciary, kind of like in a nutshell. Fiduciary roles are: you have successor trustee, executor, conservator, guardian, power of attorney for finance, and power of attorney for healthcare. Those are the different fiduciary roles when we're speaking about licensed professional fiduciaries.
When we were talking a minute ago about why someone would want to have a fiduciary, why would we consider this, right? And there's many reasons. And why not your neighbor, right? Why not somebody who isn't educated per se in finances and trust and whatnot? I'm going to add another layer to that. I've heard so many horror stories, and I'm sure you can give us examples of this, of people being taken advantage of. For example, there's been many seniors that are being taken care of by a home care agency. And not to say anything bad about home care agencies, I think most of them are very trustworthy. But I have heard on many of occasions of a home care provider. Maybe it's not agency, maybe it's just an individual provider. It even could be a family member that's providing care. And they have become the fiduciary per se, or the person overseeing the finances and the legalities of this individual, this senior. And they have taken advantage of them, really, for lack of better words, stealing from them their livelihood, their income, and just doing terrible things. Can you tell us any stories about situations that you've come across where you've had an experience with a client like this and you've kind of had to come in and repair things? Has this ever happened to any of your clients?
Yes, it has. In fact, in one of my probate cases, the executor of the mother's estate was the daughter, And she basically started using the estate checkbook for her own personal bill paying, just started using it like it was her own piggy bank. And so, so I had to come in there and I had to do forensic accounting for the court. And I basically had to explain to the court that she owes the estate like $40,000 because that's money that she took from the estate. So there's a perfect example of somebody who was the executor of their mom's estate, and they basically started using the estate funds for their own personal benefit, which is, that's, you shouldn't
It's
be
not
doing
okay.
that. You're breaking the
Right.
law.
Absolutely. And I've heard of hundreds of thousands of dollars being taken from a senior, and not always family. Again, it's a lot of times in those cases, it's somebody who's been providing care for them, who's gained their trust, who's been working with them for a long time. So this is over an extended amount of time that they've been taking from this senior, just taking advantage of them, which is completely unfortunate. Are there any signs that you would say to maybe an adult child or a loved one, these are some things that you should look out for your loved one, kind of warning signs, if you will, that your parent may need a fiduciary to step in to protect their assets and their estate, and make sure there's just somebody looking over them?
I would say maybe if somebody, if you're noticing your parents' checkbook, there's large amounts of checks being written to someone or large withdrawals from their bank account, those would definitely be red flags, for sure.
Now, I know this might be a tough question to answer, but red flags, right? We're looking at their accounts. There's big withdrawals. There's one-offs here and there. But what if maybe their children or somebody else that has access to their finance? What if they're not looking at their account? They don't have access to their finances, but they should be kind of paying attention. Is there any other kind of signs that aren't, I guess, financial signs or warnings that their parent or their loved one may be taken advantage of?
It always, the picture always kind of plays out. It's always sometimes one of the children lives at home with the parent, and that parent is always giving them money for everything. So that's a common thing that happens like all of the time when I see, and that's often, a red flag that child's using undue influence over their parent to possibly commit elder financial abuse. And especially if they're starting.
What does that look like, Marina?
What does it look like?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. Financial elder abuse. What does that look like when somebody is financially taking advantage of an elderly person? What laws are out there to protect? I know there are laws out there, but what laws are out there to protect the elderly, and what kind of action can be taken place or can take place if you know that there's been some kind of abuse there?
I would notify Adult Protective Services is what I would do. And as a licensed professional fiduciary, if I suspect elder abuse, either mental or financial, I have a mandatory reporting that I'm supposed to notify Adult Protective Services.
Adult Protective Services, it's APS. Where could we find the contact information for APS? Do you know where that would be accessible?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm sure you could probably just Google it.
Google it. And do you know, Marina, I know this is a little off topic and out of your expertise, but I'm going to ask anyhow. Do you know if there is APS is local, or is that kind of more government focus? Should we be looking for a local APS? Is there just, do you know if it's just a standard?
Yes, I believe your county resource You can start with maybe contacting your local district attorney's office.
Okay.
It might be a
Awesome.
good resource. But I
That's
believe it's a
helpful.
county-based system.
Okay. Okay, great. I mean, I think it's more rare when people need to use APS, but it is good to know that there is a resource out there. If you feel like there's someone being financially or physically abused, taken advantage of, that's who you contact, Adult Protective Services. We're going to swing this conversation a little bit. We've been talking about what happens when we know we need a fiduciary and planning for one. What are some of those warning signs? But what happens if we don't plan for a fiduciary? We never designate one, and a loved one dies, or someone who doesn't have children passes away. What happens with all of their assets?
So without a living trust or will, their estate would probably have to be subjected to probate court, and their estate would have to be probated through their local court system.
And that's a very lengthy process, isn't it?
It's a very lengthy, costly, and time-consuming process.
Is there any chance that any of the assets will be lost during that process?
Well, if you have a good fiduciary, they should be able to review the person's tax returns. Usually their tax returns are a pretty good snapshot in terms of what they own. And so you could kind of use that as your framework for jumpstarting your estate administration.
That's great. So there is definitely,
and maybe their family members, if they have whomever they left behind, maybe they might be able to provide some insight on what they left behind.
right. So having a process, having documentation, an estate plan, fiduciary, I mean, everything kind of just ties in with each other, right? This is your process in your system. Once you pass to carry on your wishes to make sure all your assets are taken care of in the way that you wish. But if you don't plan, then a lot of it could potentially be lost or just could go through a very long process, which it could be incredibly stressful for those who are left behind to take care of the assets later on in life. What about for professionals who serve seniors? So we're talking about senior living executives, attorneys, care managers, healthcare professionals. How can a fiduciary partner with these types of professionals to serve our senior community?
So basically, in my contact sphere, I have estate planning attorneys, probate attorneys, financial advisors, CPAs, home healthcare agencies, all at my fingertips to help provide the needed support to families. And so I partner with them regularly.
Now, I know personally from firsthand experience that you are actively in the community. You are so involved. I mean, you're just about everywhere. You are in the chambers, our local chambers. You're in the BNI. You're in my network, ProServe. You are just really so involved. And so I know that you're very embedded in the community. You know a ton of professionals who serve seniors. Does that play a role, you think, in the quality of service that you're able to provide your clients? Do you think that matters?
Yes, I do think it matters. First of all, I want to surround myself with a team of winners. I want veteran probate and estate planning attorneys. Good attorneys that can provide great advice to my clients. So it's all about having that team in place, ready to provide support to the families. Trusted advisors in my sphere.
Yes. And that's what we want, right? When we're looking for especially this type of service, we want somebody who is working with top tier professionals who are trusted resources, who are in the community, who are active. And we really can determine whether it's someone that we would trust our loved one with, or our clients with, because again, fiduciary services, this is something that you have other professionals partnering with. They're referring their clients to each other to support their client the best they can in a very holistic way. Is there any particular partner that comes to mind that you think is the best asset for you in your practice, and also in supporting your clients?
I would probably say estate planning and probate attorneys. Those are my power partners, and I have my team, and so I refer clients to them, and they refer clients to me. All working together to provide excellent service to families and clients.
That's great. Now, there's some things that we don't typically talk about in the public. I've worked with fiduciaries, estate attorneys, and I haven't really heard these terms. So I wanted to see if you have any experience here. There's unique services that fiduciaries can provide, such as charitable trust oversight, companion animal trust. Do you know a little bit about this? Do you have any experience in these areas, and could you tell us about it?
Sure. So one of my things that I specialize in is in pet companion trusts. One of my first cases was serving as a trustee for some cats. Their owner passed away, and at the time, we're a cat family. So at the time, I was actually able to adopt them. And so, so that's one thing I specialize in. If somebody has, a pet bird, cats, dogs, they usually provide for them in their estate plan. Who the pets are to go to, if I should find another home for them. They're very, very specific in the estate planning documents for the client. I also have some clients, they don't have any immediate family, they don't have any children, so their desire is to leave their entire estate to their select charities that they've designated for.
Now, is that tough to go through that process, especially with the charity process? Is that challenging to take what your client has left behind and hand it over to charity? What happens? I suppose there's no tax write-offs or connections anymore. So is this a very simple process?
So like I had one probate case where a lady, she left all her money to the charities that were dear to her heart. And she just said, my entire estate goes to these 6 or 7 charities. So at the end of the probate, they each got their share of the estate. And it was actually not that difficult, actually, because it's a lot easier than dealing with family members who are in conflict over everything. So it's actually not too bad.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, could you walk us through what it looks like when someone designates you as a trustee, from beginning kind of to end? What does that look like exactly?
Okay, so usually they contact me and they tell me they're looking for a fiduciary to be their successor trustee, because they don't have anyone to name, or maybe whoever they know is not trustworthy. So I usually I'll sit down with them, I'll get to know them. I think a lot of it has to do whether or not we're a good fit for each other, because we're going to sit down, we're going to talk about what their values are. Do they have religious preferences? What their long-term goals are, what their final wishes are. And so it comes down to us just getting to know each other, and then them sharing with me what their final goals are when they pass away.
So you're getting to know these people in a pretty intimate level, right? I mean, you're not just coming in and doing an assessment, and once they pass, then carrying on their wishes. There's a lot more to it.
There is. And honestly, sometimes, I get a recommendation, and sometimes it just it just doesn't, we just don't vibe, or it just doesn't, we just don't click. And it's
Yeah.
okay. This is a big decision for people, and you want to feel comfortable with the person that you're naming as your successor trustee. So it's really, really important that they feel comfortable with me and I'm comfortable with them.
Yeah, that goes both ways, right? Uh, so I assume by you saying that you work with other fiduciaries as well.
Yes, I do.
That's good. Now, there's a technical, very, very technical side to this. There's a big legal side to your services and financial aspects. How do you manage that with like the human component and honoring someone's legacy? Is there ever conflicts there? And what about internal conflicts? Have you ever had an experience where you've had a client whose wishes went against your better judgment? How do you navigate that?
Well, I I take an empathetic approach to my practice. I always try to put myself in the shoes of the other person. Sometimes it's a family member who is disgruntled, and I just try not to take it personally. And I just try to remind myself, obviously they're grief stricken. I don't know what type of trauma they suffered in this family. So I just try to be a good listener. I try to put myself in their shoes and try to have compassion. I try to approach things with a compassionate perspective. And that's all really what I really do.
Yeah. I think compassion and empathy and trust, like these are some of the greatest um contributors that we can give to the elderly when working with them. Um they have to feel a connection with us, right? And they have to feel that they can trust us and rely on us, that we're dependable. There's so many things that could be going on in their life. We haven't really touched on this before, but it just came to mind. Can you work with somebody that has dementia? Um, are you able to be a fiduciary when you know that somebody's coming to you after diagnosed with dementia?
Well, I do work with clients who have dementia, and I have one client right now. She tends to have outbursts,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes I don't know. She'll start yelling at me, and I just like I just try to remind myself this is beyond her control. This is her cognitive impairment, and so I just say, okay, well, I'm going to call you back later, okay, because I don't think you're having a good day. So let's talk on another day. Okay. And so I just try to remind myself, don't take it personally. Um, you know, they're suffering from dementia. They don't know, what they're doing, I guess.
Yeah. You- it's really tough when you're working with someone with dementia, and obviously there's different stages. Um, not knowing what's going on in their head, because what they're thinking and what they're saying could be two different things. They're trying to relate. They can't think of the word of what they're thinking. So they're expressing a word that makes them feel the way that what's in here makes them feel. So it's challenging to figure that out, right?
Yes,
Um,
it is. So
absolutely. And anger and outbursts, that's very common for those with dementia, and knowing how to handle those situations, um, how to have still that empathy layer with them and let them feel that they're heard, not ignored. So that could be really hard as a fiduciary. I could imagine how challenging that could be. Um, the great thing is like you said, you're here for the long haul, and you're here today and tomorrow. And it sounds like you do have a great deal of empathy, and you're not only supportive to them, but also their family members.
yes, I am.
You know, if you were a family member or a loved one of an elderly person, and you thought that they could benefit from working with fiduciary, what would be some of the things that you would tell them, or steps you would tell them to take to find the right fiduciary for them?
I would tell them I would speak with their estate planning attorney, and maybe they would have a referral for them, somebody who they work with and know. Otherwise, you'd also check with the Professional Fiduciary Association of California website. They have a website. Anybody could go on the website and find a fiduciary in their neighborhood, and then you can go in there, narrow it down, find a fiduciary, and then maybe pick 2 or 3 and call them up and schedule an interview with them.
Now, we talked about California because we are located in the state of California. What about those who aren't in California? Where should they look?
They should go to the National Certified Guardian website. It's also known as NCG. I don't have the website name here. Just go Google National Certified Guardian. It'll bring up the website, and that's another way where you can find somebody out of state.
Wonderful. Now, we're working with our estate planning attorney first and then selecting a fiduciary afterward, correct?
That's the way it works. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. And so you did say that your estate attorney could help to identify a fiduciary. Most estate attorneys are working with one, right? What if you don't like that one? You have every right to go out and interview others as well, right? I mean, and you did say choose 3. I think that's great advice.
Yes. And again, interview 2 or 3 and find the one who you're comfortable with, one that you feel you connect with. Definitely.
We didn't talk about one thing. We didn't talk about the cost of a fiduciary. And I know that's very hard to kind of say, what is the cost? Because every case is different, right? But is there a range at all that people can kind of gauge? This is the range I'm looking at for your services.
So it's kind of a multi-fee structure. For example, let's say that you're undertaking the task of bill paying. Some fiduciaries will charge an hourly rate. That rate could range between $195 and $275 per hour. Some fiduciaries could agree to take on your case on a fixed fee arrangement. I'm going to pay all your bills and supervise your assets for a certain fixed fee arrangement. Like they could probably just charge like 1%. I'll charge you 1% for supervising your assets. And then in probate court, those fees are set by the judicial council. So, we can't charge any more or any less than the court allows us to charge in a probate case.
And when you say that there's a percent that might be charged, does this mean that you don't receive payment until after the assets have been liquidated?
In probate court, fiduciaries don't get paid until the final petition has been filed with the court and the judge has signed the final court order saying that the estate can be distributed. And at that point, the attorney gets paid, the fiduciary gets paid, and then the heirs will then receive their distribution.
All right. But it is safe to say that when you're planning your trust, you've got to come up with your attorney fees and your fiduciary fees. There are some fees that are due up front, right? In the planning phase.
Yes. So I personally, when I get named in somebody's estate plan, I usually charge an intake fee. That's usually a flat fee, depending upon the person's financial situation. And that's for me to take custody of their estate planning documents. And then I'm also going to follow up with that client with a follow-up intake. That's so that I can get to know more about their finances and their liabilities and what their long-term objectives are.
And that makes sense because you're putting a lot of time to go over your clients' needs, their their trusts. Obviously there's a commitment that you're making as well, and you should be paid for your services. So that completely makes sense, Marina. Are there any documents or conversations or planning that adult children should have when they're starting this process with their loved one and they're starting to look and seek out a fiduciary? Is there any kind of documents that can help them prepare for starting to work with a fiduciary?
Probably say they could maybe have some sort of income statement or financial statement, maybe just a a list of assets and a list of liabilities. I think that would be very, very handy information to give to your estate planning attorney and your prospective fiduciary.
One last thing before we go. Is there anything that you would tell professionals who are working with seniors to help better educate them on how to support their clients, which are the senior, on fiduciary services and why it's important?
I just think this is such an important life decision. We spend all of our lives creating wealth, being in our jobs, trying to create this financial nest egg for our families. And I just think it's important to do your estate plan. And if you have an estate plan, I think that you should spend some time pulling it out from wherever you have it and make sure it's current. Make sure that the assets are up to date. Have you sold assets? Maybe you've changed banks. Maybe some of your assets aren't in your living trust. So I guess that would be my advice. So if you don't have an estate plan, get one. And if you have one, then I would definitely take a look at it. Talk with your estate planning attorney to see if you need to make any changes. Because when you don't do those things, then oftentimes it's too late. And I don't recommend anyone having to go through probate court or conservatorship.
Absolutely not. That's exactly what we want to avoid. Right. Well, Marina, this has been really insightful. Thank you so much for coming and educating our audience. I hope that, if you have a loved one, a parent, or even a client that needs fiduciary services, that you look up your local fiduciaries. We'll have Marina's information here readily available for our listeners. Thank you, Marina. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.